Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. Here we are again. I think it's been about 3 weeks that we've been discussing this topic, evaluating courses of action. Now, of course, to some extent, this is the entire purpose of these direct outcomes checklists. We are supposed to be evaluating courses of action. So, in the book Create Crucial Insight, Dr. Thomas Buchholz says, too often people miss the opportunity to do the following. And then in brackets it says adequately well or at all. So he's saying that some people don't do this at all, and some people don't do this adequately well. And what is it that people are missing the opportunity to do? All right, number one, avoid selecting a course of action without considering alternatives. Like, this is amazing, right? So how many times have you selected a course of action without considering alternatives? So, what that means is that when it's time to select a course of action, then it's better to start considering alternatives. Now, if you're going to consider alternatives, that means the idea, so step number one, remember, was frame context. Step number two is to develop scenarios. All right, so that means that you need to start thinking of more than one scenario. All right, so imagine that you're just kind of emotional and you're like, okay, this is the way it has to be. This is what I'm going to do. And in that case, it's possible that you are not developing alternative scenarios. You like a bull when they see the red cape of the matador. They're like, that is what I want, and they run straight for the matador. And in that case, you know what happens. The matador puts a sword into the body of the bull over and over and over again, because the bull can only see one scenario. Avoid selecting courses of action without considering alternatives. All right, another thing that he talks about that people sometimes miss the opportunity, he says, use appropriate processes to select courses of action. All right, so we continue to move up. We frame the context. We develop scenarios, and then we find similarities within this variety of scenarios. And then we find the differences between these different scenarios. And then what's next? Yesterday we talked about choosing metrics. Okay, so what is most important? Now, if you are managing a team, if you are managing a company, then I would suggest that me being right is probably not the most important metric. There could be possibly other metrics which are more important than the manager or the chief executive officer or some person that feels like they need power being right. For example, profitability. For example, employee satisfaction. For example, consumer satisfaction. So putting other people first sometimes, perhaps much of the time, could be a better thing, a better metric to base a decision upon. All right, so use appropriate processes to select courses of action. And today, it's really not too confusing, because once you find the similarities, all right, so I understand that there are similarities between the courses of action, and then I find the differences, so I understand that there are differences between the different scenarios, and then I choose metrics. All right, so what could be the next step? The next step is to evaluate the differences. So today we're talking about evaluating the differences. All right, so similarities, it doesn't matter, right? Those are ideas that you can rule out. This is similar to this. This is similar to this. So this factor cancels out. The most important part then becomes the differences. But then how do we evaluate the differences? So today we talk about step number 6, evaluate the differences. Unfortunately, you cannot evaluate differences unless you've chosen metrics. And once you've chosen the metrics, then you can properly weight these differences. All right, so use appropriate processes to select courses of action. And then number 3, it says to communicate the value that endeavors can achieve or have achieved. Now this is interesting, the idea have achieved. So if you're not really sure how to use this checklist, if you've been confused during the process, like how do I actually use this process for a decision in the future, and you're feeling reluctant to move forward using this process, then what you can do is you can use this process to evaluate the value that endeavors have had in the past. So what you do is you look into the past and you say, okay, so we had a meeting and what did we discuss? All right, so we had a big decision. And so did we have different scenarios? Probably yes. So you had one team here, you had one team here. So you had 3 different teams or 3 different people. And there was this big emotional discussion about, oh, it's like, I'm right, my scenario is the best. Another guy says, no, I'm right, my scenario is the best. And then another person says, no, I'm right, my scenario is the best. Was there any discussion about similarities? Was there any discussion about differences? Probably there was some discussion about differences because people need to distinguish how is my plan different than his plan. So he said this and I said this, and the difference is this, all right? But then who started discussing the metrics? Was there someone that said, well, based on my plan, we can achieve this goal. And since this metrics is the most important, or this set of metrics is the most important, therefore, this difference is significant. All right, so you can actually use the state impact to start to look at decisions which have been made in the past and start to evaluate the differences between scenarios and use some metrics. Start to point out which metrics are most important and then evaluate those differences. So I think today is going to be a rather short video. We are basically just pointing out that we are following this process. We will continue to go through this process in order to evaluate courses of action. And today, the main idea is that in order to evaluate differences, it's important to choose metrics. This is The Space Between Ideas, and I'm Blaine Gates.